This video is supported by CuriosityStream. This July marks the 50th anniversary of our landing on the moon. The race to the moon totally dominated space exploration in the 1960s. It was mostly like a proxy war between the United States and the Soviet Union. Wouldn't it be great if all wars were just two countries trying to out-nerd each other? By the time we landed on the moon, we had mastered launches, orbital mechanics, docking, rendezvousing, landing, even walking around another celestial body. But one thing that we hadn't mastered was actually living in space. For extended periods anyway. So before the moon missions were even complete, NASA and the Soviet Union were both already working on long-term space activities to try to learn how to actually live up there. And this ushered in the age of space stations. After the moon landings, it was kind of just assumed that we would keep exploring and go all the way out to Mars. In fact, most people had predictions that we were going to be there by the 80s. But the problem with Mars is, as opposed to the moon, which only takes about 3 days to get there, Mars takes like 6 months to get there. Plus, you wouldn't have a return window for another 18 months, which puts the whole thing at like 2.5 years of being out there. And at that point in time, the longest anybody had been in space was a couple of weeks or so. We had no idea how to survive in space that long. So even though everybody had all this exploratory zeal and wanted to go all the way out to Mars, the more prudent thing to do was to build space stations and actually learn how to live in space. And this is kind of a mind-blowing fact to me, but there has been a space station of some kind orbiting Earth since 1973. That's 46 continuous years. And it all started with Salyut 1. Yes, the Soviets who beat us to space with Sputnik and Yuri Gagarin also beat us to the space station game when they launched Salyut 1 up into orbit in September of 1971. It was 20 feet in length, 4 meters in maximum diameter, and 99 cubic meters in interior space. This was a test flight over 175 days that was visited by 2 Soyuz missions, Soyuz 10 and Soyuz 11. And this mission was only successful in the sense that they got a space station up into orbit and people did live on it, but beyond that it was kind of a mess. Tragic mess. First of all, Soyuz 10 was able to dock with it, do a soft docking anyway, but it couldn't do the hard docking, which means that it wasn't safe for the crew to actually transfer into the vehicle, so they had to completely abort the mission. They never actually even got into Salyut 1. Salyut 1 remained uninhabited, just kind of floating around in Earth orbit until Soyuz 11 was able to dock with it in June of that year. And that was a success. They were able to actually get into it, but the success kind of ended there. They encountered a variety of problems on the station, including an electrical fire, and had to abandon the mission after only 23 days, which was a record at the time, so yay. And then tragically, the Soyuz 11 capsule depressurized while re-entering the atmosphere, which killed the 3 cosmonauts. This was the first time anybody had died in re-entering. The Soviet space station program struggled for a few years. They launched 3 different space stations up there. None of them were ever manned, and the longest one that stayed up was 13 days. They did finally have some success with Salyut 3 in 1974, which was the first of 5 successful Salyut missions that increased in mission length all the way up to Salyut 7, that went up in 1982 and had 861 days of occupation in space. But bouncing back to the early 70s, this was when the United States was kind of winding down their Apollo program. The Soviets were struggling with their space station program. So in that time, the United States put up Skylab in 1973. And Skylab was awesome because basically NASA had all these Saturn V rockets laying around from the Apollo program, and they were kind of like, well, what can we do with this? And what they did was really cool. They basically took the 3rd stage of the Saturn V rocket and just turned it into a habitation module. And the cool thing about that was Skylab was huge. It was 6.6 meters wide. For comparison, the modules on the ISS are closer to 4 meters wide because they had to fit inside cargo bays like the one in the space shuttle. Skylab was occupied for 171 days by 3 different crews of 3, with missions lasting as long as 83 days, which was a record at the time. While up there, they did experiments and tested life support systems, basically just figuring out how to live and work in space. And they had some fun while they were at it. To this day, Skylab is the only space station the US has operated exclusively, and it was a groundbreaking program. Skylab re-entered the atmosphere in July of 1979 and landed near the city of Perth, Australia, to lots of media fanfare. So now back to Russia. While their final Salyut station was still orbiting around the Earth, they built and launched one of the most storied and impressive space stations in human history, the Mir space station. I have to say, I have a soft spot for Mir because this was like the little space station that could. It had no business being up there as long as it was, but it just kept going. Mir went up in 1986, but you could almost argue it was never fully completed because it was constantly being added onto during its entire life. It was like a Winchester mystery house in space. But Mir was groundbreaking in a lot of ways. Where the Salyut and Skylab missions were basically one large module, Mir was made of multiple modules that were added over time, which served as sort of a blueprint for the ISS and future space stations. Also, where previous stations had kind of just experimented with long flight things like water reuse and air circulation and that kind of stuff, Mir actually implemented it. It was designed to be the first long-term space habitat, and it did so for 15 years. In that time, it hosted astronauts from the United States and other countries, and even turned into a bit of a commercial operation, taking on the first space tourist Dennis Tito for a paltry $20 million. Toward the end of its life, Mir was kind of an orbiting dumpster fire of the station. Equipment broke down constantly to the point that the crew was so overwhelmed they just kind of had to let things go. Fires broke out on multiple occasions, and there were two collisions with Soyuz and Progress vehicles. But the thing just kept going until March of 2001, until they finally deorbited it over the South Pacific. Now, one of the reasons that Roscosmos decided to end the Mir space station was because the bulk of their funding was now going to another space station, the International Space Station. I don't think it's hyperbole to say that the ISS is one of the most expensive and ambitious projects in the history of the world. In fact, it's been called the single most expensive item of all time at over $150 billion. The ISS is a cooperative venture between the US, Russia, Japan, Canada, and the European Space Agency, which represents 13 EU countries. It's been continuously occupied for 18 years by a total of 236 people from 18 countries, and at 105 meters long and 70 meters wide, it's visible from space with the naked eye. In that time, its inhabitants have conducted countless experiments and tested long-duration space living, and given us a unique view of our own planet. It's truly meant to be a monument to international cooperation and exploration, with module names like Destiny, Quest, Tranquility, Unity, and Harmony, and it's been a shining example of what we can do when we all work together. While it is starting to show its age, there's no solid plans to end the ISS anytime soon. The Roscosmos believes after their Mir experience it could last a full 30 years if funding holds out. Currently, the program is funded through 2024, but bills have been put forward in the US to extend funding through 2030. Obviously, I'm skipping over a lot of details here because the ISS is a huge, massively complex vehicle with 18 years of stories to tell. But suffice to say, it's been one of the biggest space success stories of all time, and has taught us a lot about long-term living in space. One spacefaring country that is not a part of ISS is China. They tend to kind of go their own way in this department, which they did with their own space station called Tiangong-1 in 2011. Like a lot of the Chinese space program, a lot of this is shrouded in mystery, but Tiangong-1 was a test program for the Tiangong-1 space station program, which is also called the Chinese Large Modular Space Station. This is kind of in the realm of Mir, like meant to dock a whole bunch of different modules together to create a Chinese space station that they run all on their own. Tiangong means Heavenly Palace, and while it was in space from 2011 to 2018, it was only occupied for 25 days of that. Tiangong-1 deorbited in 2018, but before that happened in 2016, they launched Tiangong-2. This has so far been unmanned, but it's the first step in that Chinese Large Modular Space Station. The Chinese hope to launch their remaining modules over the next few years and begin occupying it with manned missions in 2022. So that brings us up to date, but let's look at some of the future space stations that are in the works. Following up on the success of the ISS, the same international partners are working on a new space station, this time around the moon. It's a project called LOPG, or the Lunar Orbital Platform Gateway, and it's a joint venture between NASA, Roscosmos, ESA, JAXA, and CSA. LOPG is a big deal because it would be the first permanent presence on the moon, and it would serve as a dropping-off point for humans and robotic landers before they descend to the surface. It's also an opportunity to test the long-term effects of living outside our magnetic shield and possibly establish a gateway for missions to Mars and beyond. The first modules are scheduled to start heading toward the moon in 2022, and it's expected to be finished by 2026. Although there are plans to continue building on top of that what they call a deep space gateway architecture, and that could go on into the 2030s. And this is of course dependent on whether or not NASA can get the SLS off the ground in the next few years, which is starting to look a little bit shaky, but there are private companies on the way up, like the Falcon Heavy, Blue Origin's New Glenn vehicle, and possibly the Starship. Now, there are a lot of critics of this plan that think it's a lot smarter to just create a moon base instead of having this sort of intermediary stopping point. They think that's just a big waste of time and money, but we'll see. Russia, meanwhile, has her sights set on a third-generation low Earth orbit station called the Orbital Piloted Assembly and Experiment Complex. They hope to get this up before the ISS comes down to maintain a presence in low Earth orbit, but the plan for this station, sometimes called OPSEC, is to create a base for assembling deep space vehicles and provide a stopping-off point for astronauts and cosmonauts returning from lunar or deep space missions. Both OPSEC and LOPG seem to be kind of buying into this paradigm of a network of space stations serving as waypoints for lunar travel and beyond. And OPSEC is planned to go up no earlier than 2024, again, just before the ISS comes down. Now, another possible Russian space station is another lunar space station that's supposed to go in conjunction with a Russian lunar base. The project is called the Lunar Orbital Station, and it kind of came out of some frustrations that they had with the international partners on LOPG. Now, some reports say that NASA did work out some of the problems that they had with LOP-G, so they might be more on board with that. This space station might, be on the back burner for now, but even if it is something that goes forward, it won't be until the 2030s. Now, everything that I've talked about so far is relating to space stations owned by state actors and nations and not private companies, and as we all know, private companies are really kind of taking over and changing the game in terms of space exploration these days. I did a video previously to talk about Bigelow Aerospace and their inflatable, or as they prefer to use, expandable habitats, and some of the plans that they have going forward, including their B330 space station and the Olympus space station, which is friggin' huge. But there are other commercial space station ventures in the works, including Orionspan's Aurora Space Hotel concept and the Gateway Foundation's Von Braun station. One of the more interesting private space station companies on their way up is a company called Axiom Space. This is actually run by a lot of heavy hitters from NASA, like longtime NASA engineers and management people, some of whom oversaw the ISS for several years. Now, those are all super interesting projects, and they probably deserve a video of their own, so maybe keep an eye out for that. Hint, hint. But space stations in general kind of get overlooked when we talk about space stuff. We like the exploration, the going where no one has gone before kind of thing. But if we're going to leave Earth, if we're going to be a spacefaring species, we have to actually go through the mundane task of living and actually working in space. And the only way to do that is through space stations. So the idea that in the next 20 years we could have a whole network of private and public space stations around the moon and around Earth, kind of just serving as waypoints for people to travel around and do science and explore, or maybe even just live and work, is really cool to me. And it's really exciting to see these plans come together and the early infrastructure being built. As I have said many times on this channel, these are interesting times. Now, speaking of going to the moon, if you're excited about that kind of thing, I would highly recommend a series called Destination Moon on CuriosityStream. In this series, they talk about the issues getting to the moon and beyond and how we got around those in the past, as well as how we'll get over them in the future. It really helps break down the strategy behind the plans we talked about here in terms of the lunar bases and lunar space stations. CuriosityStream, of course, is an awesome video service filled to the brim with science documentaries covering all kinds of topics from space and astronomy, medicine, physics, history, and much more. And it was created by some of the people who created the Discovery Channel. Remember back when the Discovery Channel actually had a whole lot of really cool science documentaries on it? Yeah, it's like that. You can get CuriosityStream for as low as $2.99 a month, but viewers of this channel, if you sign up at curiositystream.com/Joe Scott, can get 1 month for free. Seriously, if you haven't checked out CuriosityStream but you like my channel, just go check it out. You will absolutely love it. There's a link down in the description. You can click it, go to it from there. All right, thanks to CuriosityStream for supporting this video, and a huge shout out to my Answer Files on Patreon, who are forming a great community, helping me build a team around this channel so we can do even more cooler stuff. I love you guys. We got some more people I want to shout out real quick. Let me murder their names. We got Steven Scott, great last name, Hume12345, Gunner, Trent Gilly, Chuck Tyler, Pim Zweger, John M. Sundberg, Alex Andrasek, Demon4565, Samuel Decker, and Nance1976. Thank you guys so much. If you would like to join them, get access to our Discord servers and early access to videos and behind the scenes type stuff, you can go to patreon.com/answerswithjoe. T-shirts is always available in the store at answerswithjoe.com. It doesn't just support this channel, it also supports a great designer living over in Prague named Michael. I like these things, I get them all the time. People compliment me, you'll get compliments too. answerswithjoe.com/shirts. Please do like and share this video if you liked it, and if this is your first time here, Google thinks you'll like this video, because I did that one as well, and there are others that you can find, and if you go check those out and you like them, I come back with videos every Monday and Thursday, so please hit subscribe, and you can be the first to see them. All right, with that, I am taking off. Thank you guys so much for watching. Go out now, have an eye-opening week, and I'll see you next Monday. Love you guys, take care.